Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft. I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more, penniless at the end of my supply of drugs, which alone makes my life endurable. I can bear the torture no longer, and I shall cast myself from the grated window into the squalid streets below. Do not think of my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was one of the most open and least frequent parts of the broad Pacific that when the package to which I was supercargo fell a victim to the great German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk their later degeneration, so that our vessel was made legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners. So liberal indeed was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surrounding. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of longitude I knew nothing, and no island or coastline were in sight. The weather kept fair, and the uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting for either some passing ship or to be cast ashore for some habitable lands. Neither ship or lands appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon having the vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I was asleep. Its detail I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream invested, was continuously. When at last I wake up, it was to discover myself half stuck on a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine my first sensation would be of wondering at such a prodigious and unexpected transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished, for there was in the air and in the rotten soil a sinister quality which chilled me to my very core. The region was purified with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud and the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey the mere words, the utterly hideous that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save for the vast black slime. Yet the very completeness of the silence and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to be almost black in its cloudlessness, as though reflecting on the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Though some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean must have been thrown into the surface, exposing regions which for innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under the fathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me, that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging seas. Strain my ears I might, nor were there any sea fowl to prey upon the dead beings. For several hours I sat thinking and brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed like to dry sufficiently for travelling purposes for a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to the overland journey and in search of the vanished sea and a possible rescue. On the third morning I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of fish was maddening, but I was too concerned with the graver things to the mind the slight and evil, and set out boldly from unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. This night I camped, and on that following day still travelled towards the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than I had first expected it. By the fourth evening I attended of the base of the mount, which turned out to be much higher than I had expected from a distance, an intervening valley setting it out sharper relief from general surveys. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but the air of the waiting, fascinatingly gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain. As I was awake in a cold, premonition determination to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. Again, in the glow of the moon, I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Packing up my bag, and I started to crest the eminence. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me, but I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mount and looked down to the other side into the immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recess of the moon had not yet soared high enough to illuminate. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Though my terror ran curiously reminiscent of the Paradise Lost and Satan's hideous climb through the unfashionable realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I imagined. Ledges and outcrops of the rock afforded very easily footholds for descent, whilst after a drop of a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by the impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gander slope beneath, gazing into the Stygia deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at once my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite side, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I stood assured of myself. But I was conscious of the distinct impression it had on its nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with the sensation I cannot express. For despite its enormous magnitude, position into abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, perhaps the worshipped of living and thinking creatures. Yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near its zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steep that heaved the chasm, and revealed the fact of a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding me out of sight in both directions, and almost lapping at my feet as I stood on its slope. Across the chasm, waveless waves washes across the chasm. The waveless washes the base of the cyclopean monolith, one whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was systematically of hieroglyphically unknown to me, and unlike anything else I've ever seen in books, consisting for most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols, such as fish, eels, octopi, crustaceans, monoliths, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represent marine things, which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the periodical carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the inventing water on the account of their enormous size was an array of bas reliefs, whose subjects would have excited the envy of a deore. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, or at least a certain sort of man, though the creatures were shown disproportionately like fish in water, and some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. For their faces and their forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere resemblance makes me grow inveighed. Grotesquely beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Budweller, they were damningly human in general outline despite webbed hands and feet. Shockingly white and flappy lips, glassy and bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seemed to have been chiseled badly out of proportions with their scenic background. For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale represented as but a little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment I decided that they were merely but an imaginary god of some primitive fishing or sea farming tribe, some tribes whose last descendant had perished eras before. The first ancestor of the Piltdown and the Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into the past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologists, I stood musing, whilst the moon cast a queer reflection on the silent channel before me. Then suddenly I saw it, with only a slight curving to the mark as it rose above the surface. The thing slid into view above the vast dark waters. A vast, polymorpheus-like, and loathsome. It darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung a gigantic scaly arm, while it bellowed its hideous head and gave a vent to the measured sounds. I think I went mad then, of my frenetic ascent of the slope and the cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat. I remembered little. I believe I sung a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have some indistinctive recollection of a great storm, some time after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I hear babbles from thunder and other tones which nature utters only at its wildest mood. When I came out of the shadows, and I was in San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of an American ship which had picked me up in my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium I had said so much, but found that my words had been given insane attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific my rescuers knew nothing, nor did it deem necessary to insist upon a thing I knew which they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated anthologist, and amused him with the peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philippine legend of Dagon, the fish god. But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly controversial, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and warning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug had only given me transient surcease, and has drawn me into the clutches as an hopeless slave. So now I am at the end of it all, having written the full account of information, or the contemptuous amount of my fellow man. Often I ask myself if I could not all have been pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and ravening in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideous vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless thing that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering in slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stones, and carving their own digestibles likeness of submarine obelisks on the water of granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows and to drag down their wreaked talents and the remains of puny war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when all shall sink, and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst the universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as some immense slippery body slumbering against it. It shall not fight me. God, that hand! The window! The window!